Hello, everyone. Today, seeing as final exams and AP exams are coming up, I'm going to give you some computer science exam study tips. Some of these I've written about before and talked about before, but there's a couple of new ones. And just to reiterate, for those who don't know, I actually do a lot of tutoring, and one of the things I tutor in is computer science. And so these are from my own personal experience and from observations I've made with some of my students. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so the first thing that I want to suggest, if you're studying for your final exam, you need to figure out what your problem areas are. That's where you want to focus on. So you want to ask yourself, which topics did you have the most trouble with during the semester or the past year? So you're going to want to go through and get all of your notes and any of the previous exams or assignments that you've done. Look through, figure out where you missed the most points, and note those down as your problem areas. You also want to think about which topics throughout the course have been the most important. So, for example, are there some topics that form sort of like a foundation for other topics? It might be something where if you can just understand this one particular area, that will make the most difference in the whole rest of the course material. So, you want to think about that as well. And something you also want to make sure of is make sure whether or not you still remember the older material from the beginning of the semester or the beginning of the year. So, for example, if you had a section that you did particularly well on, maybe in the first month or so of class, and you haven't looked at it at all since then you might want to go back and add that as something to focus on as well. Okay. The other thing that I want to mention is that you want to make a study schedule. So I talked about this in a post that I wrote, and there's going to be links at the end and at the in the comments, or rather in the video description. Um, uh, you want to make a study schedule, and I'm going to, like I said, in those links, there's going to be a link to a sample study schedule. But the big thing is you want to make sure that you're prioritizing your problem areas. So you want to spend the most time on those, not so much on the things that come pretty easily to you. And you want to make this a very detailed schedule. You want to make sure you include the topics that you want to study. And for each topic, you want to have what practice problems you want to focus on and any examples and reading material that you want to have as part of your action plan. You can also include like any dates or deadlines, so if you want to split up your time between now and the exam, so that might also be something that you can include in your schedule. And that's also in the sample study schedule as well. Okay, so practice. Some of these things seem pretty obvious, but you'd be surprised how many students I work with who don't follow these tips, They don't practice enough. And by practice, I mean actually sitting down and writing code and running it and getting it to work and solving problems. So you don't just want to sit and listen to lecture and be like, okay, well, I've studied. You actually need to do practice problems. And I know that some of the exams, a lot of times they ask you to write out code questions, so kind of like free response questions on the AP exam, or they might ask you, write a method or a code sample that does so and so. Okay, so true, on the exam, you're not going to be able to type it into a computer, but when you're studying, it's actually helpful to type the solution into a compiler or your development environment and run it. So basically what you're doing is you're making sure that your written solution works. So, this helps you to save time so that if you're waiting for a tutor to look over your written solution, you don't have to do that. You can just go ahead and run it and see if it works. And I have had students that that waited until the tutoring session for me to tell them, okay, well, you didn't get this, you slightly messed up here on the code sample. Here's what you should have done differently. Had they actually typed it out and run it, they would have been able to figure that out a lot sooner and gotten a lot more done. So if your written sample works, that's great. But if you type it in and run it and it doesn't work, then running it and reading the error messages and fixing the mistakes is really good practice as well. I think that you'll find if you keep making the same mistakes and having to go back and fix the same things over and over again, then eventually you'll remember, okay, I need to not do this next time. So it gives you that immediate feedback. In addition, if you see any code examples in the lecture or books or tutorials or anything like that, don't just read them. As much as possible, type them up in your on your computer and run them. Even if it's lecture and you have to do it later after class, it's good practice. Okay, another biggie that I see a lot of students not doing. Take notes. So I understand that if you're studying for the final exam, you might feel like, okay, well, we're not learning anything new, so, I don't need to take notes. I would say that you still need to take notes. You need to be, again, we're talking about being active and not passive. So you don't just want to listen or just read. If you keep making the same mistakes, for instance, if you make it more than twice, write it down. Emphasize that in your notes. Make flashcards for the things that you miss the most often. And you can also use those flashcards for quick targeted study sessions. So if you're waiting in line, to get something to eat or waiting for the bus or whatever, if you have your quick portable flashcards, you can study your most problematic areas. And even if you do 5 minutes here or there, then that's going to help you a lot more. And you're focusing that time on the areas that you need the most work with. I've also noticed that a lot of students, their teacher might give them the lecture notes, and I understand why the professors and teachers do that, but at the same time, I think sometimes it's a disadvantage for the students because, again, they're passive. They figure, okay, they're giving me the notes, so I don't really have to pay attention. I can read this later, or I don't really have to do anything. I just have to listen to them talk at me. But don't do that. I would say maybe take your own notes during the class, and then you can double check them with the lecture notes to make sure to verify that your notes were right. Also, if you don't necessarily want to do all of that, on the notes that they give you, highlight the important points or things that you don't understand. Make notes of things you want to go back to. And also, if you have any of your own examples or insights, or maybe you notice, okay, this is related to something we studied before, or you want to go back in later and fill in something extra, do that. That's going to help you be a better learner. And I would also encourage you when you're writing code, or either by hand or typing it up, make notes in the code examples as comments. So, for instance, if you're doing examples, typing them in, if there's parts that you don't understand, then take notes as comments. And then when you figure out what the answers are to what you don't understand, you can put those in the comments too. So very important. Be active and take notes. Okay. The other thing that I want to talk about is making the most of your lectures and your tutoring sessions. Okay, so being a tutor, I've seen kind of firsthand how some students come to me when we're starting a session, and I want to encourage you to make sure that you're prepared so that you use your time efficiently. If you're meeting with your TA or your professor or something like that, everybody's stressed out and rushing and trying to get ready for this final exam. So you want to get the most out of your time. And to do that, I suggest that you write down your questions and your confusions before the session. I would even say that when you're studying on your own, write those questions down as notes as you're going through so you don't have to do it all at once, before the tutoring session. And again, do any assigned reading for the topic before that session and take notes. I've had students who they never do the assigned reading, and they come to the tutoring session, and I ask them, well, did you have any books or readings about that? And they're like, oh yeah, well, I had a textbook, but I never really looked at it. A lot of those questions can be answered by doing the assigned reading. So do the assigned reading if it's given to you. You want to bring your examples or problems or things that you've been working on, and let the tutor know where you're confused, what's not working and what you've tried, so that they can see your train of thought and they can better help you figure out, okay, well, here's where you're going wrong. So it helps the tutor be a lot more targeted towards getting you the solution and clearing up your confusion. And again, that's also part of being active and not passive. And most importantly, perhaps, make sure you have all your materials ready and organized so you're not scrambling and wasting time at the beginning of the session. You're not fumbling around trying to figure out, okay, where did I put my notes? Where's my pencil? Where's my paper? That sort of thing. You'd be surprised how often that happens and how much time that wastes. So make sure you come prepared and ready to work and ready to learn. So my last suggestion for now is to, if you feel like you're a group learner and you do well that way, you might want to practice teaching others. So, one way you can do this is you form a study group and you divide up your class topics among each person in the group. So then every person, and you do this before the study session, you maybe like a week before or a night before or something like that. Each person can then do a mini lecture or write like a short write-up or one-pager on the topic, and then they can share it with the rest of the group. So it's kind of like you're teaching your topic to the rest of your group, your teammates. And teaching somebody is really a great way to make sure that you understand something. And believe me, as a tutor, I always feel more knowledgeable after having taught somebody else, because it really forces me to make sure I get those details right. You can work with the rest of your group and share and exchange your notes together and compile them and put together a resource that you can use as a reference. So that also kind of lightens up the workload for all of you guys, so that you make more efficient use of your time. Help each other with questions. Nobody's necessarily going to be an expert on everything, but a group setting is a good way to figure out, okay, I don't understand something. Maybe there's somebody else in the group who can help me with it. So you're really uh, helping each other out and and making good use of your time. If you're not really a group-oriented person, it's okay, not everybody is, then you can still do a version of this. You could still write a one pager or do a PowerPoint as if you're doing a presentation, and you can pretend that you're preparing to teach someone else. So you can still do it that way. Anticipate any questions that somebody else might have. Pretend you're teaching it to a brand new person, a person who's brand new to this topic. I found that a lot of times, if you can't explain it, you probably don't understand as well as you might think. And I've had students, I've asked them to explain something to me, and if they can't, then that lets me know, okay, this is something we need to go over. All right? Okay, so if you want some more resources, first of all, I put together a study tips ebook with 20 tips. Some of them we talked a little bit about here, but there's also a lot more. You can get it at my website. There's a short link here, and it's available for Kindle. If you want to, there's a link to go to Amazon to pick it up if you have a Kindle reader. Or if you want to just download the PDF to your computer, you can buy it directly from the site. Uh, if you are really, really stressed out, and you're not in the best mental place, I have that second link is an article I wrote that helps you to sort of calm down and put things in perspective and put together an action plan for how you're going to approach this exam. Particularly if you haven't been doing so well in the class and you're afraid that you might fail, so that's something you might want to take a look at as well. And then the last link, it's another article that I wrote that has even more study exam or exam study tips, and that has the information about that study schedule that I was mentioning, and it also has a link to the sample schedule that I mentioned. All right, so I hope this is helpful. Let me know if you have any questions or that if you have any tips you want to share. Thanks.